Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Hello, engagers. Today we have somebody incredible. We have Keith Lillico. We recently met in Chicago at GamiCon with Monica Cornetti. But first and foremost, Keith, are you prepared to engage?
I think I'm locked and loaded and ready to go.
Let's do this. So Keith today, he is with us, and Keith is the founder of Lillico Learning Solutions, which works with clients to build training that is accessible to all learners, including those who have disabilities. So a very interesting approach we haven't had before. He also draws from his formal education and experience in instructional design as well as business to create learning content that focuses on meeting the needs of the learner while aligning it with enterprise-wide business objectives. He's a self-proclaimed brain learning junkie who believes anyone can learn anything they want as quickly as they want. Currently working on developing a modern, repeatable learning model that will allow learners to acquire and retain information at a rate that is much faster than traditional methods. Very, very interesting, Keith. Is there anything that we missed out from that intro?
I don't think so. I think that pretty well explains me. I think Monica, though, explained me as the Energizer Bunny on steroids.
So you could sit down with people like Bernardo, Lataif, and just...
Bernardo runs circles around me. No, he's too much energy for me.
You're the same type, just different levels, perhaps.
Definitely.
So Keith, the first question that we always like to ask our interviewees is just to get a sense of what you guys are up to, is what does a regular day with Keith look like?
So I think my regular day is a little bit different than a lot of the other guests because I am a corporate instructional designer by trade. I do have a normal Monday through Friday job where I build courses day in and day out. So my day starts about 6 a.m. I get up. First thing I do every single morning is I read the news on my phone. Anything that happened overnight, I have about 5 different news apps, and I catch up on the news. Get going, get my son up, ready for school. Usually he's sleeping. I take him to the sitter's house, but normally I'm getting him dressed while he's still asleep. Out the door, get him to the sitter's house. And then the first, most important stop of the day for me is I stop at the gas station. I start every day with a 44-ounce Diet Pepsi. It's a must to me. It's actually become like part of my creative process. I get to work in the morning, turn on my computer. About the first 45 minutes to an hour is just project planning. I have about 5 projects going on at a time. And then since I get there an hour before everybody else, I generally send out emails so that I'm at the top of their inbox so that I can get responses right away and it's not buried under everybody else's. Then is the next important stop of the day for me, which is breakfast. I go up to our beautiful cafe on the top floor of our building and get tater tots and a piece of sausage every morning. I'm a creature of habit when it comes to that stuff. Generally, I'll step out. We have a beautiful building in downtown Springfield, Illinois, which was actually designed by the same person as the World Trade Center in New York before they came down, the original Twin Towers. But we have floor-to-ceiling windows that are probably, 15 foot high, and it overlooks the city. So I usually try to just get that morning inspiration there. It's kind of cool because we can overlook new construction, but we're also the home of Abraham Lincoln. So you can see Abraham Lincoln's house from there. You can see the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library, the old state capitol. So it's just this nice mix of old architecture and new design. So that's generally where I pull my inspiration for the day. And then I go downstairs and I get locked in for the day. That's when emails start coming back in, and it's what projects are going on today. It can vary from project meetings with clients to recording audio in a sound booth all day to building a storyline, shooting videos. Really, my day is directed from that point on what projects I have going on at that point. Lunchtime, I usually do one of 2 things. I either go see my son on lunch every single day, or I, interesting enough, go to the Abraham Presidential Lincoln Library probably multiple times a month on my lunch break. It's right across the street from my office. And that's for 2 reasons. One, they have a subway inside. and there's never a line at that subway because you can only get through it through the library. So it's a giant museum. And also, I like to walk around the museum, even though I've seen it a million times, and just look at the different exhibits and just see how people are learning from it. I think when you go on as an instructional design point of view, you get a different aspect of how things are created. After lunch, I finish out my day, still locked in. Usually I'm wrapping up projects, things like that. And then the interesting thing is then I go and deliver pizzas for a pizza place at night, which most people are like, are you kidding me? Why do you do that? But I love it. I listen to, on average, I follow about 25 different podcasts. So pizza
Whoa.
delivery time for me is 4 to 5 hours a day of just catching up on podcast. So for me, it's more of just my continuing education is delivering pizzas. It's a reason to be in the car, no one bothering me, turn on the speakers and just listen to podcast. And then I just wake up the next day and do it all over again.
And it sounds like a cash generator as well, which is not bad at all.
Oh, definitely. It gets cash. But for me, again, a lot of people like, really, it's like, that's my dream job. I want to retire and deliver pizzas just so I can listen to my podcast and continue to learn and make enough money to pay some bills.
And drive around, which I'm sure you enjoy as well.
Definitely.
So Keith, we're going to take a small spin in this topic that we're talking about, your regular day. And now we're going to go into something that we would like to call the favorite fail moment, or the first attempt in learning. A fail, especially if it's something that brought you either a lot of learning experiences from that, or that you even were able to shift around and turn it into a success. Do you have a story that you can share with us, Keith? Again, if you have corporate NDAs and these kinds of things, you don't need to give us every single detail, but we want to be able to learn as much as possible from your experience.
Oh, definitely. So, man, fails. I don't think if you don't have a bunch of them, you're doing something wrong. So I think my first big fail probably predates any of my formal education or knowledge on learning itself. It was kind of just, I wanted to do it. So in the United States, to be a restaurant manager, you have to hold a license for safety and sanitation. And it's a miserable class generally, and nobody wants to go to it. But for some reason, I took it upon myself to get certified to be an instructor for it, so that I could teach my company and get some cash on the side, but so we didn't have to spend crazy amounts of money going to outside vendors on it. And the first class I had was required to be a 16-hour class, and I just spent everything making this perfect PowerPoint and even had that Jeopardy game at the end, and just I'm like, oh, this is going to be great, and I was so passionate about it. And I got up there and went through this PowerPoint, and about halfway through, nobody was paying attention. Apparently they weren't as passionate about it as I was. And then to make things worse, big learning curve there, proofread all your slides. So by the time I was done with this class, they spent more time proofreading my slides than they did actually learning what they were supposed to be learning. And then the Jeopardy came around and nobody really wanted to play. They were so burnt out, they were ready just to go home than sit there and play a game and learn what they learned and take a test. So I think what I learned from it is if your content sucks, people are still going to hate what you're doing. So definitely went back and jazzed it up a little bit, had a little more exciting in it, but it was just an absolute failure. I'm surprised I didn't just give up at that point.
Sounds like a one of those tough experiences that you get and that round you up at some point. And as you say, content is definitely king in every single way. I mean, you can't. It's the that comparison that we always use of the chocolate covered broccoli. I'm sure you've heard it before. If you cover a broccoli with chocolate, it's not going to necessarily make it better, just like you tried to do it with your Jeopardy game. Perhaps you wanted to change what the taste was for the broccoli first. So I guess that was a very steep learning curve for you, and I'm sure you did a lot better right after that. So do you have anything else you would like to add as far as learning from that?
Yeah, I think a lot of times we're mandated content. For example, I had the content. I didn't write the test. It was given to me. So I had to teach exactly what was given to me. But there's always other ways to present the content. Just because they give you a big old stack of content and say, here, this is what you have to teach, doesn't mean you have to teach it the way they tell you have to teach it. At the end of the day, it's the results that matter a lot of times. So I think it's just don't be afraid to break off from the crowd and do what's right and get your audience engaged when As long as at the end of the day they're passing and they know what they need to know, you're good.
Absolutely. And you can apply this whether you're, for example, a new teacher or a new professor and they hand you the content, or even if it's your own content that you've been delivering in a certain way and you want to change it. Don't be afraid to do something different. And it doesn't mean that if you've always done it that way or if everybody's always done it that way, it doesn't mean it's right. And I know we've heard this a million times, but breaking out from those barriers is definitely something that can be very challenging and that can make you fear for the unknown. And that's a very, very human feeling that we can get. But taking a 180-degree spin on this other question that we just had, what would be something that you faced, a big challenge, a big hairy challenge that you faced, and you said, you know what, I am going to solve this using gamification, game thinking, and you actually did, something that perhaps you would even say that you were proud of, that you want to present to the engagers?
Definitely. So the project that it's not complete yet, but I'm pretty confident it's going to achieve its results. So I'm pretty excited about it. So I'm going to use this one. So there's a certification out there called a Cicerone, which is the equivalent to a wine sommelier. And as you know, while we were in Chicago, obviously I'm a beer person. I brought my own breweries, beer, things like that. But the Cicerone is basically you are the cream of the crop of beer knowledge when it comes to service and brewing and everything else. And the challenge is the certification, there's no actual training out there for it. Here in the past few years, they've actually done hands-on boot camps that cost thousands of dollars and you can travel there. But for your average person, there's no clear roadmap. They give you a syllabus with the content. They give you a list of books to read and say, here you go, pay your money, take the test, and we'll see how you do. And actually, believe it or not, right now the pass rate of this exam is 30%. So it is lower than the state bar in every single state in the United States. So I've actually partnered with Jonathan Peters on this, and we're creating a fully gamified course based around everything someone needs to know to pass this test. And it's going to be exciting. It puts them in the experiences of being a bartender and being a delivery person and really just gets the content across all the way through. So it's a pretty exciting thing. We're actually going to debut it at the International Brewers Festival in Denver, Colorado in April, I believe is what our target date is for that.
And can you give us some sort of sneak peek into what's it going to look like? Any ideas that we can get to know how they come through? Can you give us a sneak into what you learned from that? What would be some of the experiences?
Definitely. So we went with the route of making it fully submersive, almost like it's first person. So the characters are interacting with you on the screen. It's not, oh, here's your content. They're having a conversation with you and you can respond to the conversation, and how you respond creates things. We also built in some more games with inside of the game. So all of our knowledge checks, our practice quizzes are actually a board game with inside the game. So it is e-learning, but when you click on it, it pops up a board game, and now you're playing a board game that helps you retain your knowledge. So embedding games inside of games to kind of break the monotony up is a lot of what makes it really exciting with it. We learned from it, though, that it's not a quick process. We've done rendition after rendition after rendition and scrapped it and started over multiple times. And it's just learning that you're going to make mistakes as you go through it. And you're going to think, oh, I have the right path. But when you present it to play testers, you realize you're completely off path. What was working in your head's not translating to your learners the way you want. So constant repetition, constant just perfecting it, and making sure your audience and your play testers are understanding what you're saying. Don't do things because you think they work. Make sure they work first.
That makes a lot of sense. It's something very, very interesting. Is there any way that in the future, once it's launched, that we can have some access, some previews, or somewhere that the engagers can take a look at that, even if it's in the future? Because as you know, the podcast will be live, but it will stay there for at least quite a long time.
Yeah, definitely. We'll get a link out there. If anything, we'll get like the first module out there, because I'm sure we're gonna have to come up with a module to show clients as we continue to move forward with it. So we'll see about getting a link out there for you guys to see the first module when it comes out.
Beautiful. We'll keep that updated in the show notes, again in professorgame.com. So finally, in this section, so to speak, Keith, we want to know if you have any sort of process that you follow when you're creating these games, these gamification for training, for learning. Do you follow any process from somebody else? Do you tweak any process, for example, from Jonathan Peters? I know you're partnering with him. How do you approach any of these learning projects?
So definitely, one of the biggest things that I try to work in my learning is the power of the human brain. As kids, we grew up really playing games in our head from the start. We were always the hero of our own story, or or imaginary friend who was in our brain we'd compete against. It was always games. And as we grow up, I can imagine being 16 and seeing that truck that hauls cars that looks like a ramp driving down the road, and you're in your head, you're like, challenge accepted, I'm going to ramp this, and you never actually do. But it's all about, we're constantly playing games in our head. When our parents told us to do chores, it was always, can I do it faster than my brother? Or how quick can I beat my time? And sadly, somewhere along the way, as adults, a lot of us lose that. We just get stuck in that rut of, I have to learn this. And this revelation came to me actually when I was riding in the car with my 11-year-old son, and we were talking about school. And he said, school's teaching me a lot of stuff, and they're teaching me to memorize stuff, but they're not teaching me how to learn. And he's like, I just want to learn how to learn, so I don't have to learn what they're teaching me, but I can learn what I want to learn. So that's kind of opened up my whole world of watching now my children and watching other people and seeing how kids learn. Because when you look at education degrees, you have adult education and childhood education, but why are they not the same? I know the brain evolves and grows, but the premise is the same. We learn by playing. And if we can't make games ourselves in our head and challenge ourselves, we can't learn. So for me, everything's always a leaderboard. I'm ultra competitive. So if I find out, when I got my first master's degree, my first question to my advisor was, and I was at a school that you can work at your own pace, what's the fastest anyone's ever completed this degree? And that's immediately was, all right, now that's my challenge. And what I did is I built myself a narrative. So, I set my goals and my side marks and said, all right, so now I'm creating this narrative in my head where I'm the hero of my own story, and I reached this goal, and now I'm going to the next goal. So it's really taking game mechanics and moving them inside. And looking at other things like degrees, letters after your name, those are badges. Mechanics actually exist everywhere, but we get so dialed in on the actual ones that everybody sees. How do I put a badge on this LMS? Well, there's badges there. You get your certificate, you get your degree, things like that there. So a lot of it is that type of thing. So I'm actually currently working on, and you mentioned in the intro, a repeatable learning process where I can sit down with someone who wants to learn something, whether it's a degree or a certification or something like that, and say, okay, cool. So here's your map. Now let's write a narrative around your goals, or let's figure out what badges are going to be there, or what's your leaderboard? Who are you comparing yourself to? And just building that process with them that they can basically gamify their own learning without realizing it. And I call it repeatable because once they learn the process and what works for them, they can then do it over and over and over again every time they need to learn things.
Fantastic. That sounds very, very exciting, Keith. Just a quick break before we continue with this episode. If you've been enjoying this podcast, I would really appreciate if you share it with your friends and family and on social media. On Twitter and Instagram, it's at RobAlvarezB and the hashtag ProfessorGame, all one word. And in Facebook, you can find the Professor Game page. Thanks in advance for your engagement. And now we're going to move into this sort of second part of the interview where the questions change from that more story mode and that more like further explanation of every single detail to something that is more sort of tips, very quick answers, etc. in this second section. So the first thing we would like to know is if you have anything that you would say is sort of a best practice or something that almost any gamification or game-based learning project could benefit from.
Definitely. I think as a designer, the best thing you can do is build your network and don't rely on the same people every single time. And that's the best thing for your designs as a whole. The beautiful thing about the gamification world is everybody is so nice and everybody's willing to share. So any project you have, you can get inspiration from anybody. So I would say look outside of your normal areas to get inspiration. Not only in the gamification world, but like I said, going over to museums and libraries. And I don't start any project I do without looking for inspiration somewhere before I get started. I don't just sit down and start putting things on a screen or start mapping things out. So I think look outside of yourself, build a network, and get inspiration from other places.
Looking for inspiration in elsewhere, not only in games, not only in gamification experts, worldwide again, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of people who are very willing to help, but also look for inspiration somewhere else. I think it was Marigo who said once that game designers are actually looking at life itself to build the games, and we're looking at games to build our gamification. So perhaps looking, as you say, to life itself would also make a lot of sense. And when you're looking at games as well, I'm sure you probably have one game that you say, well, that is my favorite game. What would that game be, Keith?
Red Dead Redemption 2, enough said. No, I'm joking. The game itself, Red Dead Redemption 2, from a gamification standpoint, is just amazing. I mean, the narrative all the way throughout the game is almost like a movie in itself. And, there's side quests and there's missions and there's collaboration with others. It's just everything you can possibly think of has been crammed into this game. So it's a thing of beauty in itself.
I had a chance to play Red Dead Redemption for like an hour in my stay in Amsterdam because I stayed at a phenomenal hotel beyond the hotel in itself by the concept. It's called the Arcade Hotel. So you have all sorts of consoles. You have a game room. You have a console in your room. You have comics. You have board games. You have absolutely almost anything that you can think of. And I had a chance. I hadn't played it before. They had it there in every single console that it's available, and I played for a while, and I can completely relate to that excitement from Red Dead Redemption. Very, very, very nice game. The next thing that we would like to know, Keith, is if there's anybody that you would really enjoy listening to in an episode of Professor Game.
Definitely. Actually, I was kind of stressing over this question. I knew you were going to ask it because you look back at the last year and it's like, wow, he's had just about everybody on there. But I think I found two I think that you have not interviewed that I would love to hear. So the first would be Chuck Sigmund with Amazon Alexa. He's doing some really great things worldwide. And the other one, which I would just love to hear more and hear stories, Philip Bush. And I know you know Philip. He's just doing amazing work with what he's doing, not even just from a game design and learning, but everything he's doing in the learning world just has such a big impact.
As well, and Philip is working for the NGO world, so the impact that he's having is also of a different kind. So it's a very interesting character as well.
So, and then two few reach ones that you might have to work a little bit for would be Joshua Fair and Ben Pridmore, which are champions of the World Competitive Memory Championships. And I just thinking about how people learn and how people memorize stuff would do so much for the gamification and learning world as a whole.
Yeah, to understand how that works, right?
Oh yeah, they can memorize decks of cards in 30 seconds. It's amazing.
It's absolutely phenomenal, I'm sure. And in that same sense, is there any book that you would recommend the engagers to read?
Definitely. Continuing on to my last statement, I think everybody should read or listen. I'm an audiobook person when I'm delivering pieces. Moonwalking with Einstein, which is the story of Joshua Farr as he went from journalist all the way through preparing for the U.S. Memory Championships, and just not only does it give you some of the techniques he used along the way, but the stories about how he learned and this whole just subculture of people who they memorize stuff for fun. And it sounds boring, but it's just captivating. And I'm not going to ruin why the book's called Moonwalking with Einstein, but it'll make a lot of sense to you once you read it. So there's a little teaser there for you to go out and read the book.
It's a mystery as well. And again, we are into the gamification space, but we are especially in the gamification for learning. So how people are able to memorize things and to learn from these things is super, super relevant. So thanks for that recommendation, Keith. What would you say, Keith, is your superpower when you're creating your gamification, your sweet spot?
So mine would be teaching people to conquer things. I don't want my learners just to learn things or, reach just enough. I want them just to overcome them and conquer them. So I want them to be experts in whatever I just taught them.
Fantastic, phenomenal. Finally, there's this sort of gamified question that we every once in a while are able to make when we are in these interviews. And it's questions that come from our audience. Sometimes they allow us to reveal who it was. Sometimes they don't. So I'm going to pick a random question which you have never heard before. And, okay. As a learning professional, I've been doing this for many years, and perhaps you get used to some long faces now and then, and in the end you normalize it, so you feel it's normal, I guess. That's what the person is saying. After listening to this podcast and reading some things online, I've grown a new perspective, which is a bit frightening. My learners might be bored. What should someone like me, after 10 plus years training people, do to perform better, to improve engagement in my sessions? How do I even start? That's an interesting one, and I'm sure you have a good stab at it. What do you think, Keith?
My first intuition would be to do something drastic. I don't know that they're using the same learners all the time. It sounds like they might be in an environment where they have the same learners, but always do the unexpected. Especially if you've been into the industry for years, you have a reputation. People know how you're going to train. People know how you're going to talk. Just flip it on its head one day. If that means you come in and you jump up on a table and you start teaching from on top of a table, or just bring excitement and energy into the room, and you'll immediately see how your learners react. Sometimes you're going to overdo it, but one rule I've always had when it comes to facilitating and teaching itself is the same as what they teach you on stage. If you don't feel like you're overdoing it, then you're not doing it enough. And if you feel like you're overdoing it, your learners will never notice. So really just go over the top, do something different, do something drastic, and just reinvent yourself. Don't forget the past, because you can learn from it, but you can always reinvent yourself and do something exciting.
That sounds like a great recommendation, especially to break through patterns. This person was mentioning that he or she has 10 plus years experience. You have a pattern, and as you were saying, people know you for certain things. So if you completely break the pattern, it's going to do two things. Your learners are not always going to expect what you've been delivering all the time, which is a great thing. And you are going to be able to say, well, I did that, which was super over the top, super crazy compared to things that I've been doing before. Can I do something that is maybe not so over the top and now refine it a little bit more? And that's where the actual, because if you do it, it's just a one-off, maybe it won't change too much. But if you do it once, it kind of works, but it needs refinement. Of course, you can always roll a little bit back, and it's always going to be still very different from what you did at the start. So I love that recommendation. Thank you, Keith, for some awesome advice for our engagers. So finally, Keith, we're reaching the end of this interview, and I wanted to know if you have any piece of advice for the engagers in general, like especially for those people who are getting started, like our question. Maybe they have 10 plus years experience, or maybe they're starting today, but they are perhaps starting in gamification. What should they do? What should they consult? Any quick piece of advice? Let us know how can we connect with you, and then we'll say game over.
Definitely. So for people who are just getting started, especially, my thing would be, don't be intimidated. When I first got into gamification and learning and development in general, I always looked at these people who I would consider giants in the industry, or, thought leaders, and man, I wish I could be like them. And it wasn't until I started really engaging with these people and talking to these people, realizing that one, these people aren't standoffish people in a high palace. They will gladly help anyone. But two, I wasn't as far behind as I felt. You naturally are your own worst critic. Go talk to people, get feedback, and they're either going to help you or you're going to realize you're not as bad off as you really think you are. So don't be afraid to reach out and get just anyone a quick email or a quick, tweet to someone saying, hey, I'd like to connect with you, can go a long way. So that would be my advice to anyone, is don't be afraid to reach out.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think this is a recurring theme today, that we've been talking about how nice people can be in this, especially in the gamification field. I feel that in general we are very, very approachable. We're very willing to help each other out. So that invitation makes beautiful sense. Keith, again, it's the end of the interview. I don't want to let you go before you let us know how can we find you, if we want to make any further questions, if we want to engage with anything that you're doing, if we want to find out where your launch is going to be. Where can we find you, Keith?
Yeah, definitely. So you can reach me on Twitter at Lillico72. It's KLILLICO 72, and I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just search my name, Keith Lillico. And hopefully here soon, like I said, we'll have the initial launch of that beer course coming out. And I actually do have a book hopefully coming out here soon based on that repeatable learning method. So just kind of stay tuned and watch my Twitter feed and stuff like that for that to come out.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Keith, for your time, for your recommendations, for all those value bombs that you dropped during the episode. However, it's now time to say it's game over.
All right. Thank you.
Hey, Engagers. Thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. And if you want more interviews with incredible guests like Keith, then go to professorgame.com/subscribe and get started into our email list. That way, we can be in contact and you will be the first to know of any opportunities that Professor Game might have for you. And before you go on to your next mission, would you like to know what Scott Hebert's new gamification book is about? Then subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. And enjoy all the episodes that you want during these fantastic holidays. Hope you enjoy them a lot and see you there.